While we do have some good news for Ukraine, the overall situation is not good. In Donbas, in 2 different places, Ukrainian forces face envelopment, face being encircled. In one of the cases, it probably is close to being done at this very moment. The talk is about 2 battalions being cut off at this very moment or very close to it. We'll talk about this as well as about the other developments along the front line in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Drone attacks and attacks by the Russians continue. The only thing out of the extraordinary is a supposedly successful Ukrainian drone strike on a GRU radio station on the Crimean Peninsula, as well as a strike on a harbor on the Crimean Peninsula, which we'll talk about later. On the northern front, we have the Russians advancing in Vovchansk. Here we see in a geolocation that the Russians have crossed the Kortenka Street here. They are now south of it. So far, they have only been north of it in this area. On the map here, this is over here. So they have advanced roughly to, in late videos, roughly like this. They have crossed the street here. That was already it from the north. We'll switch over to the eastern front line, and here I don't have anything new either north of the Seversky Donetsk over the last 2 days, even though the Russians have had some successes, quite some notable successes in the last couple of days. The last 2 days I cannot confirm anything new. South of the Seversky Donetsk we have the Russians now northeast of Rostolivka. They are roughly here at this point. We also have a geolocation of this at this point right to the northeast. Rostolivka has fallen, and the pro-Ukrainian deep state map still acts like Ivano Darivka is not under threat, even though we've seen a flag raised here. So the real front line might be somewhere like this. As of now, I can't really say what happened afterwards because Ukrainian claims are that they pushed the Russians out again. There are no visual evidence. There's no visual evidence I know of about though. At Chasiv Yar, the Russians keep attacking, but so far I cannot confirm any additional advances by them. The canal here in the east of Chasiv Yar is the front line now, and so far at least it's stable. Further south, the Russians have had additional advances in New York. Here we see the Russians advancing in the west of the city at 2 positions, and this is more or less in this part here. So the Russians have advanced in this area here now as well. Here we see fresh Russian presence pushing north and stabilizing their sights as well. To the west of it, the Russians also keep advancing. They have gained additional ground here west of Losuvatske. They have more or less taken this area here. They also managed to advance here west of Progress. They managed to even out the front line in this area, and they've gained some area southeast of Novoselivka Persha as well. We also have visual evidence of them advancing in Novoselivka Persha. Here the Russians have reached the southeast, and then a new geolocation shows them in the west as well. So they have taken control over the full city. The real front line now is probably like this here. The town of Novoselivka Persha has fallen completely. And I almost forgot about it because we have some good news for Ukraine. This video shows a Russian drone, a Russian close air support plane, the Sukhoi 25 Frogfoot, 2 of them flying here, and Ukrainian soldiers see them passing by. And here we see the Western aid in effect as the Ukrainians are able to launch a Manpads towards the Russians, probably a Stinger, which one of them, as you can see, one of them is hitting it. It was aimed at the second one, which is struck, and a second video of a drone hovering above it shows the plane burning here, and the the parachute of the pilot who managed to bail out. The location was geolocated 4 kilometers behind the front line, so while the plane is lost, the pilot likely survived in this context. Just the chute itself is no clear conclusive evidence that he survived, but the Russians claim he did, and so it's probably likely. But let's go back to the front line here. We have the loss of Novoselivka Persha that can be confirmed as of now. So over the last few days, the Russians advanced here, up here at various points and managed to advance further west, continuing to push in the direction of Pokrovsk. Further south, in Krasnohorivka, I see fresh geolocations, but everything inside of the area that I already attribute to the Russians. So I don't see any change in territory here. But we have a Ukrainian mill blogger saying that the Russians managed to advance towards the road here, the O0532 by 1.5 kilometers in depth over the last few days with motorcycle troops. In total, they are only 3 kilometers away from the road, as he claims of now. Let's see this here. If we take the range, this is more or less the confirmation of what we see here. So he confirms that there have been additional advances lately, but as said, so far the road is still open, even though it's fully in range of FPV drones. And so far, Vuhledar is not cut off from one of its 2 vital ground lines of communications. I have nothing additional to report from anything west of it, so the front line seems to be unchanged. We have something from the southeastern Crimean Peninsula, though. Here we have a Ukrainian drone attack on the ferries in Kavkaz. There a fire has started, and the visual evidence shows us that the Ukrainians actually hit something. We see that here, that the ferry was hit. This is the Slavianin, a railroad ferry, and supposedly the last one that was undamaged. And you can see this is the ship, and you can see the structure here fairly well. So it seems the ship was actually hit. This is also a sign that the air defense in the area can be overwhelmed and can be struck, which to me is more or less conclusive that the Western powers do not allow Ukraine to strike the Crimean Bridge. If they are able to strike here, they could probably fly something better and faster with some stealth features into the bridge, a sign that Storm Shadow, Scalp, and Attackams are not given the permission to strike the Crimean Bridge by the Western aid. When we go to the overall strategic situation, there we have serious problems for the Ukrainians in 2 points. First of all, we have a Facebook post here by Yuri Butusov, where he explains that the Russians do not focus the weak lines in regards to the fortifications, but they concentrate on weak identified units. Some units break fairly easily, and the Russians ignore where the fortifications are weak. They simply concentrate on those units. Even if they only defend a small line, they still push it, so the units break, are withdrawn, and then afterwards they are often being refilled, and then this doesn't change the overall situation. So the units are still weak, but they have received reinforcements. Then they get attacked again, cause more losses, suffer more losses, have to pull back or flee again, withdraw again, are being filled up again, which means that better units don't even get the necessary supplies because the weak units simply can't be stabilized at these front lines, and the Russians are obviously able to identify where those weak units are. But this isn't all, because the situation threatens two encirclements. We have one up here, and here the Russians recently gained this area, and supposedly they gained some in the north as well. And as of my information, and I see that confirmed by most Ukrainian sources, there are still Ukrainian troops in here, and we have to see if we take the confirmed distance of the Russian presence, then we are at 400 meters, where if according to the map there's barely a tree line, it's open field, so the soldiers in these positions would have to withdraw in full rifle distance, walk by foot on foot, because they probably don't have mechanized forces here. They would have to walk on foot through this area for a distance of roughly at least 1.5 kilometers in the open, being under full threat. So those units, if they are still there, to be perfectly honest, they are probably going to be lost. Ukrainians say it's up to 2 battalions of the 31st Mechanized Brigades that is here. Now, a battalion in peacetime in the intended strength would be roughly 800 men, plus minus, depends on the nation, depends on the unit, etc. But if we take under 800 men, this would mean 1,600. This is unrealistic, though. It's extremely unlikely that the Ukrainians forced 1,600 men in this short of a distance here of just, what is that? Of just 800 meters. That's impossible. So what we will have is more likely units, parts of 2 battalions that are there. Squadron size. So in total, that might be 50 men. That might at most be 80 men. So the situation is less dramatic than they might say, because this is not the full battalion. There's obviously not the kitchen crew in there as well, and so on. But from 2 battalions, forces are in there and are about to be cut off. And the Ukrainians also see the dramatic situation here, where we still have Ukrainian troops in the southern area here. They are still holding out there, and obviously, as of now, we saw the Russians advancing here fairly quickly. This is, should they be able to push over here, the whole south would be cut off in total. This is just a distance of 3 kilometers left, and the south would be cut off as well. The Russians have recently advanced here. Should they manage to close this there, they would catch a lot more troops. There's significant criticism towards the Ukrainian commander-in-chief, under whose rule, under whose leadership several of those cases have happened recently. The most famous one is in Avdiivka, where the Ukrainian troops stayed in the south here, roughly at this area here, for quite a long time, while the Ukrainians had already lost these positions here and the Russians were already up here. And at that point, we had news that the troops were still in the south, and the vast majority of them were lost trying to withdraw. The criticism is being thrown at Syrskyi, at the commander-in-chief, even though we have others saying Syrskyi is on it and looking at everything and knows the situation along the front line. So it's obviously not my place to say he's at fault and this is how it is. But the concern is being voiced by the Ukrainians as well, that they might be cut off here and they might be cut off here as well. And the issue remains that the Russians concentrate on weak units, not on weak positions along the front line. So if those weak units aren't being pulled out, the Russian advances might continue for quite a while. But if they are pulled out, with whom are they being replaced? So the situation here is fairly problematic at several points, and this is supposedly one of the successes, one of the reasons for the Russian recent successes. There's also another thing. We talked in recent situation reports about the Russian motorcycle troops. I just said that the Russian motorcycle troops had an effect here in the southeast, and the reason for the Russian success of motorcycle troops, apart from speed and mobility, is being attributed, or can probably be attributed better, if we take it in combination with the glide bomb usage. Glide bombs have such a devastating effect that the best protection against it, except for praying, is to dig down, and to dig down really deep. To have bunkers that have maybe several exits, but so they can't be closed down just with one hit, but the bunkers have to be so deep that even bigger bombs can't hurt it. And that means the units are so deep underground that going up takes quite some time, simply because of the length of the march up. So if the Russians coordinate motorcycle attacks with glide bomb attacks, then it might shine a completely different light on it, as the Ukrainians are being pushed underground with glide bombs. Rapid units charging the front line with their motorcycles allow the Russians to enter the trenches of the Ukrainians as no later than when they come out of their bunkers, and thus giving the Russians a significant tactical advantage in advancing towards Ukrainian positions. Then we have news from the rear areas here. This was also an article talking about the situation here as well. But we have the news from Moscow. In the north of Moscow, the car of a high-ranking GRU officer, so the Russian military intelligence, was blown up by a bomb. The victim, the Russian officer, has lost both of his legs, according to the reports. So supposedly he's still alive. His wife was in the car and is injured. And the interesting part is the Turks have already arrested a potential suspect, as reports had identified him placing the bomb under the car on surveillance cameras footage, and he has flown to Turkey, where he was already arrested. In troop generations, we have more news about Moscow. In the last situation report, I talked about the Moscow raising the signing bonus to 1.9 million rubles, which I already talked about it. And in the first year, they're also going to get 5.2 million in wages. And this is roughly or close to 60,000 US dollars. This has to be understood that in Russia, the average income is 670 US dollars. So in total, we are talking about close to 10 times as much as the average income. The minimum wage is only $200, significantly more in this regard. So this leads to the conclusion that the Russians, as long as they can keep raising the wages, they will probably for the time being be able to find enough volunteers to keep signing up. But it shows that the situation is already getting more problematic. And at the same time, it obviously will lead to competition with the industry. If people sign up to military service, they are lacking in the industry. Then we have an article, a Russian article, discussing how to combat drones. We talked in the past that the Ukrainians have started using trainer planes and even ultralight planes to shoot down drones in their rear areas, and this is being discussed on the Russian side now, which planes might be used for this, that private planes, that trainer planes could be used in various parts to address this issue. We see again both sides learning from the other side, seeing the innovations of the other one that work and trying to replicate them. And from South Korea, we have news. The South Korean defense minister said that up to 5.2 million 152 millimeter shells have already been delivered to North Korea. This is from the calculation of the containers that have been seen to be moved towards Russia. So up to 5.2 million 152 millimeter shells might have been delivered from North Korea. On troop generation in Ukraine side, we have some news as well. The Ukrainians are receiving 5 Lyut UGVs. Those are unmanned ground vehicles. These they are here on the image. They are equipped with a PKT machine gun. The armor is supposedly strong enough against splinters and infantry weapons, and they are meant to support infantry attacks with suppressive fire. This would indicate that probably the recoil can't be fully handled for accurate shooting, even though we see optics, supposedly they have. This is being explained as 2 optics for the sighting system, and it has a 360-degree coverage of the cameras with wide-angle cameras back and forth. So the size of it will obviously have some issues with the recoil, and here it's being sold as they are against for suppressing fire. They are obviously 100% accuracy is less important, but we see again innovation. Now the ground attacks might be supported with UGVs here. Then we see another change we have here. This is the Ukrainians shooting down drones with Vampire. Those are Hydra 70 missiles. Those are the missiles that are being used in rocket pods, for instance, from helicopters like the Apache. They have been changed that they have a guiding system that allows for laser guidance. And as we can see, the Shahid here is locked on and the missile closes in, not even with much higher speed, as it's not meant to be an air-to-air weapon and thus doesn't have to be fast enough to catch a real plane. But here again, it shows them shooting down Hydras. The really important part is not that this allows for a new development for new sources of ground-to-air munitions. The reported price for each shot is $20,000, so it's fairly affordable and allows for shooting down drones much, much better, as serious, bigger surface-to-air missiles are far too expensive for that job. To shoot down a drone that supposedly only costs tens of thousands of dollars, you can't easily use drones. You can't easily use surface-to-air missiles that are used to shoot down ballistic missiles or planes. Then we have here is the system, just so it can be mounted on basically anything with wheels. We see it here, a 4-piece launcher and the optics to it on a regular pickup, so it can be mounted everywhere. Then we have an image. It's from a video, and YouTube doesn't like me posting these videos. This video shows Ukrainian soldiers marching in Kharkiv. You can see that there's already damage on top of the building, so this is close to the combat zones. Still, they march without any distance to each other. The Russians identify it, show that their kill chain is now fast enough to immediately fire on it. Probably with mortar fire they are being hit, and even then a lot of the soldiers stick together, run to a house which is then being shelled again. So this likely has caused serious losses to the Ukrainians in this instance. The important thing we can see here is a clear lack of discipline and training. It should be basic training to know that you have to keep your distance among each other, and that's what non-commissioned officers are for, to enforce things like this if the regular enlisted personnel are too lazy or too not well enough trained to follow rules like this. For that, you have non-commissioned officers to enforce those rules, and we see a complete lack in both regards. Neither the enlisted personnel has a clue what they are doing in this regard, that they are being threatened, even though they are in shell range of the Russians, and the non-commissioned officers don't enforce it as well. Obviously, we do not have a clue how the mine situation is. Maybe they all walk in line because there's a mine situation, but still, that still wouldn't justify the close distances. This was part of basic training, probably third or second week in my basic training, where we learned to have distances among each other, and we see the Ukrainians completely ignoring it in this regard. Then we have news from the political sphere. The Russian Attorney General has met with his North Korean colleague in Pyongyang. They agreed in cooperation in the prosecution, obviously saying volumes if Russia is believing that the general prosecutor and attorney general in North Korea is an actual equivalent to a country that probably still supposedly claims to follow the rule of law. But as I said, it shows the development of the Russian-North Korean relationship. Then the Georgian authorities have issued arrest warrants for 300 citizens that are fighting in the Georgian Legion. In part, they are being accused of conspiracy to overthrow the government, of terrorism, and of being a mercenary for Ukraine. So Georgian volunteers fighting for Ukraine are being threatened with arrest now if they are home, or if they're coming home. In international support, we have some news. The first 50,000 rounds from the Czech initiative have finally arrived in Ukraine. More to come really soon. Then Rheinmetall, the German defense giant, has received an order to equip an ammunition factory in Ukraine. Production is supposed to start within 24 months. So while it's not immediate help, soon within the next 2 years, Ukraine will have another domestic source for ammunition. And almost 100% of the Slovak ammunition production is going to Ukraine. This year, the supposed number of shells is 125, but there the volume is going up to a volume of 200,000 in the next year. Then we have more signs of technical innovations. We have here a Ukrainian Baba Yaga bomber drone that is first being observed from above, and then an FPV drone hunts it down. The Baba Yaga is a domestically developed drone by the Ukrainians that is a bomber drone, so it flies fairly high and drops shells directly under it and can carry a fair amount of it. There are even rumors that they're halfway automated or completely automated as of now, and here we have an example of one being hunted down by the Russians with an FPV drone. And finally, somewhat emotional video. They always catch me. We have here Ukrainian soldiers that have finished their training in Spain that are being saluted by their Spanish comrades while the Ukrainians are on their way to return home to obviously go to war and face the dangers of war. We've shown these pictures, some of these videos in the past, and they are always able to move me to a certain degree. But that was it from me for now. If you like this video, then please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon, even though I don't have good news for Ukraine, and I know the vast majority seems to like very one-dimensional videos. If you prefer me trying to be as objective as I can and trying to still say things that are unpleasant, then I would really like to see you again. I would really like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Leave a comment if you have anything to say to this. And this channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. So if you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.